entrenching poverty and perpetuating inequality. With these challenges in mind, let me mention just 3 areas where regional commitment is vital. First, the unprecedented population changes unfolding across the Asia-Pacific region require a coordinated response. Many countries have a rapidly aging population. The proportion of the people aged over 60 is expected to double to a quarter of the region's population by 2050. Efficiently meeting the needs of an aging society and ensuring healthy and productive lives must be a priority. This means promoting health services and policies that promote and enable active aging, better integrating healthcare services, and making it more attractive for healthcare workers to operate in rural areas. It also means improving lifelong learning and employment opportunities to ensure our economies as well as our societies benefit from all the older person's experience. I'm looking forward to hearing about the work I know many of you are undertaking, and your thoughts on where positive experiences can be further replicated. Second, we need stronger regional response to increasing migration. Most international migration happens in Asia and the Pacific, and mainly towards developing countries. There are some 62 million migrants in our region, up by 20% since 1990. Despite the contribution they make, migrants are exposed to exploitation and abuse. They are particularly likely to be denied access to essential services. So I hope discussions this week can build further momentum to support safe, orderly, and regular migration ahead of discussions on the Global Compact in Marrakesh later this year. Third, to respond effectively to the major population shifts underway, we must join forces to improve our evidence base. We need disaggregated data to tell us who is being left behind. The availability of reliable and timely demographic data remains limited. Data on social issues lags far behind anything related to the economy. Millions of births remain unregistered, leading to the denial of essential public services, particularly for women and girls. Of 43 countries which conducted a census between 2005 and 2014, only 16 have reliable data on international migration. With the 2020 censuses approaching, there is a strong case for strengthening our partnerships to close these data gaps. There are valuable initiatives underway to stop these gaps occurring. ASEAN has taken an initiative to promote universal birth registration, prevent statelessness, and improve the recognition of basic human rights for vulnerable groups. In South Asia, 8 countries are reviewing their legal frameworks to ensure registration and citizenship is equally accessible. Ladies and gentlemen, the midterm review of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration is an opportunity to accelerate a common response. As a region, we can give scale to individual countries' work on aging, migration, youth, and population. At UNCC, we are committed to supporting the sharing of best practice on policies in all these areas. We are helping countries to build capacities to do so. I hope your deliberations will give further momentum to our collective effort, accelerate work to meet the needs of older persons and migrants, and improve data to leave no one behind and in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you for your kind attention. I wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Executive Secretary Ms. Armida Alice Jabana. Your eloquent address underscores the critical importance of this midterm review for the Asia and Pacific region and of placing people at the centre of sustainable development. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the pleasure of inviting Ms. Laura London, Assistant Secretary-General and Deputy Executive Director for Management, UNFPA, to deliver her opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, partners, colleagues and friends. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you today, together with the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, to this midterm review of the Asia-Pacific Population Conference. The APPC is the longest-standing regional conference on population and development, a testament to the historic importance of these issues in this region. The last time we met, 5 years ago, you analyzed the trends and policies in place and identified the barriers faced in fulfilling the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development, the ICPD. And you set out your vision for the best way forward amidst the transition from the MDGs to the 2030 Agenda. The result was captured in the Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. Today, we are 5 years into the implementation of this declaration and 25 years into efforts to achieve the program of action of the ICPD. Ladies and gentlemen, the International Conference on Population and Development was a central moment in sustainable development. It was in Cairo 25 years ago that 179 member states endorsed the ICPD program of action, thereby shifting the population debate from one of human numbers to one of human rights. In Cairo, world leaders recognized that investing in individual capabilities, dignity, and human rights is the foundation of sustainable development. UNFPA is very excited by this engagement today from government delegates, civil society, young and older people, and those of all abilities gathered here today to discuss some of the region's most pressing issues in the area of population and development. Over the next 2 days, we have a historic opportunity to celebrate progress on the implementation of the Ministerial Declaration, and in the context of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, to share experiences and to redouble our efforts to reach those still left behind. This region's deliberations are vital, not only for the countries assembled here today, but for the world. The demographic transformations we see in the Asia-Pacific region represent the diversity of experiences around the world today. Over the course of the next 3 days, member states will present progress, gaps and challenges, and lessons learned. And later today, you will hear in detail about the reports that ESCAP and UNFPA have jointly produced using national reports, regional data, and the most up-to-date research. Allow me, distinguished delegates, to highlight some of the key findings for your deliberations. Across the region, there has been great gains in the 25 years of the program of action. We are closer to achieving our goal of ensuring that every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. Poverty reduction has advanced in this region faster than in any other in the world. Many countries have extended the reach of essential healthcare services to more than 2/3 of their population. Some have done so free of charge, and others through low-cost public health insurance. As a result, people's out-of-pocket expenditures on healthcare have fallen around the region. More women have access to sexual reproductive health and rights, empowering them to make choices about their bodies, their lives, and their families. Adolescent fertility has fallen across the region. Since 2013, maternal mortality rates have decreased or stabilized in every country in the region, driven by significant improvements in maternal care, particularly antenatal care and skilled attendance at birth. Young people benefit from better access to education and are more involved in decisions affecting their future. People are living longer and more healthily than ever before. Both life expectancy and healthy life expectancy increased in most of the Asia-Pacific regions between 2000 and 2015. This is part of the success of human-centered development that is bringing about population aging. Finally, data quality has improved and is being used to measure, monitor, track, and improve policy outcomes. But the journey is far from complete. The prospects for every 10-year-old girl today to enjoy good health, rights, and well-being over the course of her life are far from certain. As the review reports show, too many people are still left behind and are not able to contribute their full potential to our societies. Informal and vulnerable employment remain high, accounting for more than half of those working in many countries. Women's labor force participation has stagnated in Southeast Asia and fallen in South Asia, reinforced by gender inequality. Across 33 countries in the region, the odds of a woman being employed full-time are 21% lower than those of a man. And for a woman with children, they are 28% lower. Women face barriers to employment, including child, early and forced marriage, lack of control over fertility, insufficient education, and more. Ensuring access to sexual reproductive health and right is a core component of the program of action and its human rights-based approach. While many countries in the region have progressed in this area, disparities still exist, particularly between rural and urban areas and income groups. These gaps need to be closed to ensure that all women can exercise their reproductive rights regardless of circumstance. Gender-based violence persists, threatening the health, safety, freedom, and at times the very survival of women and their families. Available data from across the region shows little change in the proportion of women suffering physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner in the last 12 months, with more than a quarter of women in several countries reporting such violence. Secondary education completion is very unequal by gender, with many girls left behind in South and Southwest Asia, while other countries are seeing girls surge ahead and boys fall behind. Youth employment is a major concern. At 10.8%, Asia and the Pacific overall has a youth employment rate below the world average. Yet this figure masks large differences between countries, and especially in North and Central Asia, where the youth employment rate is 14.9%. Ensuring the empowerment, education, and employment of every young person is vital for realizing prospects for the demographic dividend, especially as the window of opportunity starts to close in countries that are aging. A number of countries in East and Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia are rapidly aging. To prepare for this, they need to invest in social protection, health systems, age-friendly infrastructure, and much more. Countries are attempting to address all of these challenges amidst the unprecedented and expanding threats that climate change brings. The Asia-Pacific is already the most disaster-prone region in the world, and climate change is likely to increase the number of people affected by disasters. In this new and changing environment, your successes, your challenges, and the hard lessons you have learned in implementing the Ministerial Declaration and the ICPD Programme of Action are essential for realizing the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda. Excellencies, delegates, colleagues, and friends, these gains and these challenges reveal how far we have come and how far we have yet to go. All of us have a responsibility to fulfill our commitments. This conference is, once again, part of a global process. In the past 4 months, each region of the world has reviewed their progress since their 2030 regional conference on population and development. Next year, 25 years after Cairo, the Commission on Population and Development will conduct a full review of the ICPD Programme of Action and its contributions to the 2030 Agenda. This will inform its first full review of the 2030 Agenda in the UN General Assembly. Your leadership in this region, as member states, as civil society organizations, academia, and development partners, has been critical to our collective progress since Cairo and since 2013. It will be no less so as we accelerate towards 2030. So it is critical that the outcomes of this conference are transmitted to the Commission on Population and Development for the global review and are a major part of the review of the 2030 Agenda at national, regional, and global levels. We know that this region will shine brightly on the global stage because of your actions and the outcomes of this conference. Alongside of our sister agencies, UNFPA stands ready to support you as we work together to ensure the rights, the choices, progress, and sustainable development for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. London, for highlighting the progress Asia and the Pacific has made, as well as reminding us of the work left to be done as we work towards the 2030 Agenda. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the pleasure of inviting His Excellency Mr. Wichawat Itsrapakdi, Advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, to deliver his opening remarks.
Madam Executive Secretary, Ms. Laura London, Deputy Executive Director of UNFPA, Excellencies, distinguished participants. 5 years ago in this same building, ESCAP member states gathered to adopt the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development, outlining region-specific policy directions and priority actions in the area of population and development. This outcome document provides the basis for the regional review meeting taking place today, and it will inform the review and appraisal of the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development, and its contribution to the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the Commission on Population and Development in 2019, as Ms. London just mentioned. When the member states assembled in Cairo in 1994 to adopt the program of action, we recognized that the world had undergone far-reaching changes. Thanks to national and international efforts, significant progress had been made in many fields important for human welfare. However, despite such advancements, developing countries still face serious economic difficulties. The number of people living in poverty was still high. The natural resources on which future generations would depend for their survival were continually being depleted, and environmental degradation was on the rise. A global consensus therefore arose on the need to collectively address the critical challenges and interrelationship between population and sustained economic growth within the context of sustainable development. The ICPD Program of Action was the document that summarized those views and identified follow-up actions. The Program of Action recommends a set of important population and development objectives, as well as qualitative, not only quantitative goals. It asserts that the true focus of development policy must be the improvement of individual lives. This is very much in line with the Sufficiency Economy Philosophy, or SEP, conceived by His Majesty the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej of Thailand, which aims to empower the people and communities. Over the past 2 decades, the Program of Action has contributed to major improvements in poverty reduction, health, especially reproductive and sexual health, education, child and maternal mortality reduction, as well as women's empowerment and gender equality. However, notwithstanding such progress, we should not be complacent, as these development gains have not yet reached everyone, and significant gaps and inequalities still remain. Much remains to be accomplished. We therefore must demonstrate our renewed commitments to addressing them. While governments have the main responsibility to cope with these challenges, depending on the public sector alone will no longer work. The bureaucratic systems and limited budgets of governments are somewhat major constraints. Partnerships and international cooperation are essentially required if we are to achieve our intentional targets. All members and all groups in society have the right and indeed the responsibility to play an active part in efforts to reach those goals. Adequate and innovative resource mobilization is therefore needed to strengthen the capacity of national, regional, and international institutions to implement this program of action and ministerial declaration. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, improving the well-being of the people is essentially the ultimate goal of any administration. Allow me here to cite a few examples of actions taken by the government of Thailand, particularly in the area of population and development, to improve the people's livelihoods. Thailand's population development policy has been holistically incorporated into the 12th National Economic and Social Development Plan 2017 to 2021, taking into consideration the demographic transition towards an aging society and specific challenges facing the Thai population in all dimensions, such as health, education, inequality, and human capital development. Thailand is a pioneer in universal health coverage, or UHC, among developing countries. Our UHC, with coverage of 99.9% of the population, has resulted in a substantial reduction in the levels of out-of-pocket payments, preventing many poor households from impoverishment. In 2016, Thailand was certified by the World Health Organization as a country that had eliminated mother-to-child transmission of HIV and congenital syphilis, becoming the second non-OECD country after Cuba to achieve this goal. In 2015, access to basic education for the school-age population stood at 90.1%, and the level continues to increase. The Thai government provides such education to every child, regardless of their nationality and legal status, and grants Thai citizenship to foreign children born in Thailand, in accordance with specified criteria and conditions. The government also strives to make sure that migrant workers can live with dignity in our country. Through the expansion of legal employment channels, migrant workers are protected from various forms of exploitation, including forced labor, debt bondage, and worse forms of child labor. Thailand has also been promoting ethical recruitment and a good labor practices program for the business sector. Moreover, a hotline has been set up with the option of 3 different languages for migrants seeking assistance. These are just a few examples of the measures taken by the Thai government and the remarkable achievements that have been made. Yet we do recognize that much more has to be done to tackle the remaining challenges. One of these challenges is that of an aging society. As a nation, Thailand is aging rapidly. By 2040, the country will see the number of elderly persons reaching close to 21 million people, or 31% of the entire population. We therefore need more actively to prepare people who are approaching retirement age so that they remain healthy enough to be resourceful persons and not become a burden to the society. Another challenge is the notable increase in adolescents' pregnancies. We have tried to cope with this issue by enacting 2 years ago the Act for Prevention and Solution of the Adolescent Pregnancy Problem, BE 2559. The aim was to bring down the number of adolescent pregnancies. The effectiveness of this legislation should become apparent in the years ahead. To tackle population and development issues, Thailand embraces a whole-of-society approach. A public-private people partnership, or the so-called Pracharat Initiative, has been established to harness resources, knowledge, and wisdom of all sectors of the society to come up with effective solutions to people's problems. For example, 12 private companies have joined in education reform to create model partnership schools and to assist teachers to use modern teaching and learning techniques. Large and medium-sized corporations have adopted the principles of sustainable development to their business practices, according to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Thailand stands ready to engage and work constructively with ESCAP, UNFPA, and all the member states in addressing population and development challenges. Recently, the Thailand International Cooperation Agency, or TICA, under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with UNFPA country offices in Thailand, Bhutan, and Laos, have implemented a program on facilitating cooperation for making motherhood safer. Thailand's success in maternal health care and services has allowed the country to share and exchange its experiences with other countries, especially those that face a high maternal mortality rate. This is truly a concrete example of South-South cooperation. As Thailand takes on the ASEAN Chairmanship next year, actually the gavel has already arrived in Bangkok, please rest assured that our commitments to the Asia-Pacific region and to the world remain firm. And as a candidate for the ECOSOC membership for the year 2020 to 2022, Thailand is committed to join global efforts in advancing the population and development agenda and in achieving the SDGs in order to fulfill the 2030 agenda's ultimate goal of leaving no one behind. Allow me to take this opportunity to congratulate and thank ESCAP and UNFPA for co-hosting this midterm review. My appreciation also goes to civil society organizations who have worked tirelessly to provide services to those in need. Finally, I hope that this 3-day meeting will provide us with a platform to assess our progress against the commitments we made in 2013 and to recommit ourselves to greater efforts to address the remaining challenges. As a wise man named Albert Einstein once said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Today, we have a greater duty than ever to jointly find innovative forms of partnership and cooperation towards achieving a healthy population and a sustainable world. I wish the meeting a successful outcome. I certainly hope you all have a pleasant stay here in Bangkok and will have some free time to take in the sights and to enjoy some shopping. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Wichawat Itsarapakdi, for your inspiring address and for enlightening us about the progress made in your country. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, We now have the honour to watch a video message by Ms. Jayatma Wikramanayake, UN Envoy for Youth, Secretariat staff. Please show the video message.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, and fellow young people. Asia and the Pacific is home to about 700 million people aged 15 to 24, which constitutes almost 60% of the global youth population. Given the enthusiasm, creativity, expertise, and talent that young people possess, this demographic reality presents a tremendous opportunity for the region and the world at large, if the necessary and critical investments are made. We need to ensure that young people, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity, have access to quality education that leads to decent and productive work, that they have access to information and services which enable them to make healthy and informed choices, that their human rights are protected and promoted, and that there are safe spaces for young people to participate in decisions that affect their lives. This includes meaningful engagement in protecting the planet and promoting and sustaining peace and prosperity. While the Asia-Pacific region has made significant progress on issues related to young people, more must be done. It's not right that in some countries of the region, less than 50% of young women are illiterate, while in others, youth unemployment is well over 20%. This needs to be addressed with steadfast commitment and the meaningful engagement of young people. The United Nations is stepping up its efforts to address young people's needs and engage with them as strategic actors for development. This is what Youth 2030, the first ever United Nations Youth Strategy launched by the Secretary General this past September, aims to do. The strategy aims to fulfill the vision of a world in which the human rights of every young person are realized, a world in which every young person is empowered to achieve their full potential, and a world that recognizes that young people's agency and resilience can promote positive change. The strategy reaffirms the historic recognition in the ICPD Program of Action of the rights of adolescents and young people to sexual and reproductive health information and services consistent with their evolving capacities and in response to their special needs. The strategy also seeks to make better use of partnerships, including those that actively engage youth. Working together as governments, young people, civil society, and the United Nations, we can put the right policies in place to ensure that this largest ever generation of young people are empowered to transform the Asia-Pacific economies, societies, and environment. A transformation that works for all and leaves no one behind. A transformation that delivers on the visionary program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. With this in mind, I sincerely wish you successful deliberations and sending you youthful wishes. Thank you.
Ms. Jayatma Wikramanayake, although you could not be with us here in person, we surely thank you for recording such an empowering message. I believe that the introductory statements we have heard suitably frame the work before us for this current session. Distinguished delegates, our distinguished speakers now have to leave the meeting to attend to other engagements. Please join me in thanking them for their presence here this morning. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed to invite nominations for the offices. I have the pleasure to invite Ms. Sabine Henning, Secretary of the Midterm Review and Chief of the Sustainable Demographic Transition Section, to join Mr. Anderson, Officer in Charge of the Social Development Division, to the rostrum. To commence proceedings, I now invite Mr. Anderson to speak.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to conduct the election of officers for the midterm review of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. The meeting will elect one chair and two vice chairs. I'm pleased to invite nominations from the floor. I recognize the distinguished representative of Indonesia, please.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation from Indonesia has the honor to nominate the following bureau for this meeting. For the position of the chair, Philippines, Executive Directors, Commission on Population, Dr. Juan Antonio Perez Search. For the position of Vice Chair, Afghanistan, Senior Advisor to the Minister of Public Health, Dr. Ahmad Jan Naim, and Fiji, Permanent Secretary for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Josefa Croy Vita. We are sure that under the able leadership of this distinguished bureau, all the tasks assigned to us will be achieved successfully. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. The distinguished representative of Indonesia has nominated as chair from the Philippines the Executive Director, Commission on Population, Dr. Juan Antonio Perez III. For the two vice chairs, from Afghanistan, the Senior Advisor to the Minister of Public Health, Dr. Ahmad Jan Naim, and from Fiji, the Permanent Secretary for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Josefa Kurivietu. Would any other delegation wish to take the floor? Okay. I recognize the distinguished representative of China. Please.
Thank you. The delegation from China would like to second the nomination made by the delegation of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any other delegation wish to take the floor? I see none. I also see nods of agreement. I declare the following delegates elected to the Bureau of this meeting. For chair, from the Philippines, the Executive Director, Commission on Population, Dr. Juan Antonio Perez III. For the two vice chairs, from Afghanistan, the Senior Advisor to the Minister of Public Health, Dr. Ahmad Jan Naim. And from Fiji, the Permanent Secretary for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Josefa Kurivietu. Let us all give a round of applause to the newly elected Bureau. I would now like to invite the chair to please take his seat up here at the rostrum. Sir, please.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to serve as your chair for this important midterm review of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. On behalf of the Bureau, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to all distinguished delegates for the confidence you have reposed in us. I hereby call this meeting to order. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as the high-level speakers this morning said so eloquently, people are at the center of sustainable development. The Asia-Pacific region is undergoing a profound demographic transition, resulting in slower population growth and changing age structures, alongside unprecedented levels of international migration and rapid urbanization. These trends have important implications for all three pillars of sustainable development: social, economic, and environmental. Your presence here today shows your commitment and the importance you attach to addressing population dynamics in the context of sustainable development. I look forward to our discussions in this regard over the next 2.5 days. The purpose of the midterm review is to provide region-specific inputs to the review and appraisal of the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development and its contribution to the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the 52nd session of the Commission on Population and Development in New York from 1 to 5 April 2019. We are also tasked with providing input to the 75th session of the Economic and Social Commission in May 2019. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as chair of the midterm review of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development, I will do my best, along with the Bureau, to ensure that we fully achieve our shared objectives for a successful meeting outcome. For this, I seek your full cooperation. Let me remind you that member states and CSOs wishing to make formal statements should inscribe with the conference officers for the agenda item they wish to address. I shall count on the able support of my Bureau colleagues and on the Secretariat for this, and I thank you. We shall now, and I thank you for this election. We shall now take up Agenda Item 1C, Adoption of the Agenda as presented in document ESCAP/APPC/2018/L.1. Are there any comments on the provisional agenda which has been circulated well in advance by the Secretariat? As there are no comments, the provisional agenda is adopted. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we now conclude this agenda item and will now have a short coffee break. I ask that you return to this room at 10:20 sharp. The meeting is adjourned. I would like to give the floor to the Master of Ceremony for some final remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a break and I invite you to enjoy some refreshments served outside the conference room. You are kindly reminded to return to the meeting room by 10:20 a.m. Heads of country delegations with E-badges are invited to join for a group photo outside Conference Room 1. Ushers will help escort heads of country delegations to the photo area. Thank you.
Check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check.
Good morning. Will the delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We will be beginning the next session. Agenda Item 2, Review of Progress towards the Implementation of the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development, the key actions for its further implementation, and the recommendations of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let us now proceed with agenda item number 2, review of progress towards the implementation of the program of action of the ICPD, the key actions for its further implementation, and the recommendations of the APMD on population and development. For this item, you should have before you document ESCAP/APPC/2018/1/1. I would also like to inform you that the synthesis report ESCAP/APPC/2018/CRP/1 has been posted on the meeting website. It summarizes the results of the national reports sent to us ahead of this meeting. I have been informed that the Secretariat and UNFPA would like to show the video from ICPD to the SDGs, leaving no one behind. May I ask the colleagues to proceed with screening the video?
Over 4.5 billion people live in Asia and the Pacific, well over half the world's population. In 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development marked a new chapter, putting people at the heart of development. 179 governments agreed that recognizing the rights of everyone, young people, older persons, women, men, persons with disabilities, rural, urban, migrants, were essential for sustainable development.
The International Conference on Population and Development Program of Action is more relevant now than ever. It shows that rights are intrinsically intertwined with development. We cannot have one without the other. Without fulfilling the program of action, we cannot achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
ICPD led to many achievements celebrated in Asia and the Pacific, but persistent challenges remain. Maternal mortality has been halved across the region, but far too many women continue to die from complications in pregnancy and childbirth. More people than ever are able to choose the number and spacing of their children, but over 140 million women still need access to safe and effective contraception. In most countries, as many girls as boys are enrolled in primary school, and 700 million bright young minds are transforming societies across the region. But young people, especially girls, need access to better quality education and decent jobs. Life expectancy has increased, a triumph of development, but rapid population aging must be addressed. Migrants too need to be included and protected, and climate change risks are undermining gains that have been made. There are also more data for evidence-based development, but data do not always translate into action. We need to come together and recommit to the promises we made in 1994. More jobs and opportunities, access to education and sexual and reproductive health services, ending violence against women and girls, protecting our planet, including vulnerable people, and defending the rights of all.
The International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, Program of Action, was revolutionary when unanimously approved in Cairo in 1994. ICPD guides UNFPA's work even today. In significant ways, ICPD paved the way for and is embedded within the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. By transforming the lives of people the world over, especially women and girls, UNFPA contributes to achieving the vision of 2030, to leave no one behind.
People and development go hand in hand. By respecting equality and human rights for all, we can secure a sustainable future in Asia and the Pacific. Keeping the promises made in 1994 and meeting the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, ultimately leaving no one behind.
I would like to thank the Secretariat and the UNFPA for preparing this video. We will now, thank you to our colleagues. We will now have a high-level panel discussion on the topic of the agenda item. The panel discussion is expected to inform the discussions of this meeting. I have the honor to invite Mr. Bjorn Andersen, Regional Director, UNFPA Asia and the Pacific Regional Office, who will moderate the discussion. Mr. Anderson, distinguished panel members, may I invite you to take your seats in the sofa chairs in front of the rostrum.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm delighted to be here and as part of the high-level panel to discuss the reviews and progress towards the implementation of the program of action of the ICPD and the key actions for its further implementation, and the recommendations of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. 5 years ago, as reflection was underway as to the scope of the new development agenda, which would take us beyond 2015, we met to consider the state of population and development in the Asia-Pacific region. We found great progress, but also persistent challenges and new issues emerging that called for refocusing of our priorities in terms of population and development. Above all, we found that the area of sustainable development continued to recognize people as its center, addressing their needs, but also celebrating and strengthening their achievements. We reaffirmed that this is the adoption of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development, which set out the regional priorities and recommitted ourselves to its implementation. Since then, we have adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a transformative agenda for people, the planet, and prosperity, which builds on the consensus agreed in Cairo in 1994. And we have begun work on its achievement, aiming to bring the fruits of development for all. This is a very timely moment, and therefore to pause and reflect on how these efforts are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. How do our efforts to support sustainable development support the achievement of the priorities set out in the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Declaration of 2013? And how does the integration of these priorities into our efforts to support sustainable development across all three of its dimensions, social, economic, and environmental, add value to these efforts? And to help shed the light of these topics, it's my pleasure to introduce the distinguished panel members before us, in the hope that we will all benefit from enhanced awareness and, in particular, greater resolve to act in order to address inequity. So it's my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Mr. Richard Mauro, Minister of National Planning and Monitoring from Papua New Guinea. You're welcome, sir. Mr. Gavin Jones, Emeritus Professor, Australian National University. Welcome. And Mr. John Wilmoth, Director of the United Nations Population Division, Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York. And Ms. Siva Thathendran, Executive Director of the Asia-Pacific Research and Resource Center for Women. You're all welcome, and please help me to give an applause to the panelists. So I will give the floor to each panelist to respond to some questions for 5 to 7 minutes, and then I'll open the floor for questions and comments, and then we will get back to the panel. And we have about 90 minutes for these high-level discussions. So let me start with you, Mr. Minister. What major population trends are affecting your country, Papua New Guinea, and how are you addressing them? And how are these trends affecting inequalities in your country, and how are you addressing those? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I want to start by saying we have a population of 8 million that's growing at the rate of 3.1% per annum, which is one of the highest in our region. Out of that, half of the population are basically women. The key issues that we are faced with is the bulk of our people live in the rural areas, 80% of our population, and a lot of them are underserved in many aspects, in education and in health. Many of them don't have roads to the villages, water, so we have some serious challenges that we continue to confront. Over the last 5 years, the O'Neill government has embarked on a major investment program to provide improved services to our people. Before we took government over 5 years ago, half of our children didn't go to school. So we started by introducing a policy on free education. By introducing that policy, we have 1.5 million more kids going to school, and the figure is now getting up to 90% of our school-age children able to get to a classroom and getting education, and over half of them are women. This is an intervention we've done we started 5 years ago, and the results have been very, very impressive so far. So we've got the volumes coming in. Our key focus now is to work on the quality of education, and that's really our key focus into the future. So that program of introducing free education has absolutely increased enrollments beyond our own expectations. So that's one aspect, to get more women educated in our country, and that program is working It's working very well. The other program is improving service delivery in the rural areas, because 80% of our people live in the districts as opposed to urban areas. Government is now, for the first time, starting 6 years ago, in our budget now, put the bulk of our development budget to fund improve services in the rural areas. And I'm talking, we're building district hospitals in every district in our country. This is the first time any government has made a commitment to do that. So we could improve the health indicators in our country. We've just rolled out a program to bring in electricity to nearly 80% of our population by 2030. In fact, at the APEC meeting we hosted last week, 4 other countries have joined Papua New Guinea, the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, to fund a 3.6 billion kina program to roll out electricity to all the villages right across the length and breadth of our country. We have 850 languages and 800 islands, so you can imagine how difficult it is. But that's an exciting program to bring electricity, and we're working on a submarine cable to run right through the country, and also from Australia to Papua New Guinea, to reduce the cost of internet, so all our kids will have access to cheaper internet services and have access to telemedicine and improved education outcomes. Our biggest problem confronting us is half our population are young people, and high level of unemployment for young people is the biggest issue that we are confronted with. Our government has just come back to power over 12 months ago, and we've now embarked on a program to look at skill training for all our young people, starting with looking at global models and bringing and investing in youth skills, business incubation centers. That's a program we are going to start to address the huge level of unemployment of our young people. The other program is to skill them through TVET education. So we're looking at building another 5 TVET colleges in the country, starting from next year, in order to train and skill a lot more young people in the country that needed to be skilled, not only to work in Papua New Guinea, but also to work in other parts of the world. So skilling young people and empowering them is very, very important. Because a lot of our people still do not have access to roads, our government has now embarked on a program to build 5 new international highways in one term of parliament, and that's in 5 years. This is a very ambitious undertaking, and we are now working on funding to fund major roads, which will open up great parts of the country that needs to be opened up, so we can provide support for not only health education, but also to try and unlock our potential in agriculture in a serious way, so we can get more and more of our young people to be engaged in working for themselves in farming communities right across the country. So I want to conclude by saying we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. Focusing on unlocking the land, focusing on unlocking our economic potential is certainly the way to go. Obviously, with far bigger budgets, we will be able to do more for our people in education, in health. And our first priority as government now is to secure our future through inclusive and sustainable economic development. That's our new priority of our new government just coming in. And we are going to work with our churches, all our partners, to help us unlock our potential, because we have so much resources. But the lives of our people hasn't changed to the extent that we would have expected, given the vast endowments we have. So we are now focusing on unlocking our economic potential by bringing in more investors from across the globe, unlocking our land so the bulk of our people can be engaged in income-generating activities. And certainly our focus is on making sure more and more of our women are educated, they have a career. They don't need to be left in villages and getting involved in marriages, as early as 18. We need to get them all engaged in education and create a future for all of them. And that really is the challenge for us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you for bringing out so clearly the needs and the possibilities of young people, and how you can really, if you address education and health, make sure that you can, in that way, invest in economic growth in your country. Thank you for that. Mr. Jones, over to you. Now, moving from a very specific country example to the broader picture across the Asia-Pacific region, what would you say are the major population megatrends, and how are they linked to inequalities and vice versa?
Thank you. Before directly answering this question, it's important, I think, to briefly outline the background of population megatrends in the region, because there is great diversity. Fertility rates have declined substantially, infant mortality rates have declined substantially. These are remarkable successes in the region as a whole. But if we generalize, there are three groups of countries in the Asia-Pacific region. The first group, if we look at fertility rates, has below replacement fertility, far below replacement fertility, and most of those countries are in East Asia. Then there's a second group which have fertility rates fairly close to replacement level, a bit above, a bit below, and that includes most of the countries of the region. And then there's a group of a few countries which still have higher fertility rates, total fertility rates above 3. And the issues facing these groups of countries are rather different. Poverty is most marked in groups 2 and 3, but happily poverty has also been greatly reduced in the Asia-Pacific region. Enormous success in a country like China, but also many other countries which have reduced their levels of absolute poverty. However, income inequality remains extremely marked and is actually growing in the Asia-Pacific region. So if we're talking about people left behind, in relative terms, there are certainly an increasing number of people being left behind. Most Asian Pacific countries are well along in experiencing the potential demographic dividend. In the Group 1 countries, the working age population is already declining, and in the Group 2 countries, they still have a couple of decades where they can really benefit from the demographic dividend. But that potential dividend, as we know, will only be experienced if serious efforts are put into educational development and job creation. And that must be directed particularly to the disadvantaged, those in rural and isolated areas, those in lower income groups, and those whose parents themselves had little or no education. And we see enormous differentials according to those background characteristics. Happily, there are countries where progress is being made in reducing educational differentials, the socioeconomic, and Indonesia is an example, for example, where lower secondary education, we've seen a distinct narrowing of socioeconomic differentials in access. Now, at higher levels of education, that is, progress is much less in Indonesia, but overall it's encouraging that at the lower secondary level, there is real progress being made. And that's partly because of a strong stress on education in Indonesian development planning, but it's also assisted by the fact that the number of children is not increasing anymore as a result of declines in total fertility rates. Thinking of policies that can help in lessening inequality in education, pardon me, we hear a lot about provision of quality early childhood development and preschool education, and the way that this can contribute to narrowing differentials, giving a leg up to disadvantaged children. But if we look at the reality, it's actually the reverse, that preschool education is availed of more by the elites and the wealthy in society. And so preschool education, which could, in theory, be assisting the narrowing of socioeconomic differentials, is probably actually serving to increase them. well, enough of education. What about some of the aspects of changes in family roles and composition? There's not time to go into this very much, but we all are aware of the aging, which was discussed in the earlier video, and the difficulty that that's posing for families to provide their traditional role in caring for elderly members of the family and in the community. Another issue is the continued prevalence of child marriage in some Asian countries, most notably Bangladesh, India and Nepal, but other countries as well, including some in Southeast Asia. Certainly the incidence of child marriage is decreasing, and that's a very good thing, but it still affects millions of girls in the region. Strong efforts are needed to do away with this practice. There's probably not time for me to go into the reasons here. I think you're all aware of what they are. But the relationship of child marriage to inequality is that child marriage and all the disadvantages it brings to young women is more prevalent among socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. So it reinforces the gap in well-being between the lower socioeconomic groups and the better off groups. One major trend is urbanisation and city growth, another mega trend. This can be a positive force, of course, for socioeconomic development, but if not well planned, it can contribute to increased inequalities. Urban environments provide a stark contrast between the living conditions of the poor and the wealthy, not only in terms of their quality of life, but also in terms of their exposure to environmental hazards. The poorest urban dwellers are likely to live in informal settlements in hazard-prone areas, placing them at greatest risk for a range of environmental threats. Asian cities are already feeling the immediate impacts of climate change. For example, rising temperatures affect the working conditions and health of low-income workers, and changing disease patterns are exacerbating health challenges. Unfortunately, poor urban communities are not receiving the attention and services they deserve. In many Asian cities, the existing administrative, financial and technical facilities of the city are heavily biased in favour of the urban elites and rich communities. The reverse question of how inequalities affect some of the demographic megatrends, I'll just make a couple of quick observations on that. As an example, we can come back to educational inequalities. The poorly educated have poorer infant health and higher infant mortality. They also have higher fertility. These two differentials, of course, partly offset each other in influencing population growth, but the fertility differential is the dominant factor affecting growth. Strong progress in bringing education to the disadvantaged groups in the population will result in lower fertility and an earlier and more marked demographic dividend, which in turn should lead to more rapid development for the country as a whole and greater capacity to bring quality education to the disadvantaged. Focusing quickly on the rural areas from which people continue to migrate to the cities, in societies where inequality is marked, we generally find that many poor people are losing their land because of insecure land rights, land fragmentation and erosion, climate change, and land grabbing and forced displacement. Small family farms operate a declining share of farmland, so inequality in rural areas is a potent driver of rural-urban migration. In a society with marked inequality, a large proportion of the population faces deprivation in access to health services, access to family planning services, access to secondary school education, and limited employment opportunities. In unequal societies, the reproduction of poverty, that is, poverty being handed down from generation to generation, is common. In such societies, the health of family members suffers and unwanted fertility is more common. Illness in the family and unwanted fertility limits the opportunities open to women and hence makes it harder for them and their families to be lifted out of poverty. I could say many more things, but I think time has run out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Yeah, we should all appreciate the difficult task to outline all the mega trends in the region in 7 minutes. I think it's an impossible task, but thank you for highlighting, you know, what's happening in terms of urbanization, in terms of health and education related to inequalities. But I'm sure we will come back to more in details later on. Now, having talked about a specific country example, talked about the region, let's take this to the global level. And Mr. Wilmoth, you are working in New York with the Population and Development Division, or the Population Division. And how do you see all these reviews which have taken place at the regional level? This is the last one out of the 5 reviews which have happened. And how will this inform the global process and the global guidance, if you like, to regions and countries as we move forward in 2019?
Thank you, Bjorn. I guess this is working. Okay, good. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. As Professor Jones has outlined, there are some global megatrends which influence the population trends around the world. There are differences across the regions, but there are also some commonalities. The world's population as a whole is still growing. It's becoming older. It's becoming more mobile and more spatially concentrated. These are the demographic megatrends that we often talk about. And those are true for the world as a whole, and they're true for individual countries over the last century or even half century. Although admittedly in some recent decades, there have been some exceptions to that. In particular, some countries are no longer growing, and they've either stabilized their population size or some are even beginning to lose population. But they're still part of a world that is growing, and so it's still part of a growing global population. And there are also some regional specificities that are worth noting, that different regions face different challenges. For example, in Latin America, there's been an enormous reduction in fertility, but fertility among adolescents remains unusually high. And in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, there's continues to be an issue of an unmet need for family planning that's quite high, and fertility levels are accordingly higher than in that region than in most of the rest of the world. In parts of Asia, in particular Eastern Asia, it was highlighted earlier, and also in Europe, there's the issue of very low fertility, where sometimes couples seem to be unable to achieve the level of fertility that they would like, to have the number of children that they would enjoy having. And governments are trying to intervene to help support families and raise the birth rate. So with these challenges, the different regions have taken up the process of reviewing the outcomes of either the ICPD 25 years ago, or there's a specific focus in all the regions on what happened 5 years before. So at the global level, this is a ICPD plus 25 review, because there was no outcome document 5 years ago, or in 2014, I guess 4 years ago. So at the global level, the focus is on plus 25, but for each of the regions, it's really a plus 5 based on the outcome documents that were adopted in 2013. And I would say, as you noted, this is the last of the 5 regional reviews to take place. The first one was in Lima, Peru, for for Latin America and the Caribbean region. And in between, we've had the African review in Accra and the ECE review that took place in Geneva and in Beirut for the Arab region. And this is the last of the 5 reviews to take place. And they have some similarities that I just want to point out. As I mentioned, they're not only plus 25 reviews, they're plus 5 reviews based on the outcomes adopted in 2013. Mostly they do not have negotiated outcomes, but rather there's a focus on some kind of review report or a chair's summary of the discussions. And this, I think, is probably going to be replicated to the extent possible at the global level, because the focus seems to be, and correctly, on implementation at this point, that this is a moment to kind of take stock of what was agreed 5 years ago at the regions, and to try to carry that forward. And so the focus is on practical issues, it's on implementation. There's a big focus on data that's worth mentioning. Most of these, or several of the regional reviews have included a focus on indicators. In particular, trying to link the indicators of the Sustainable Development Agenda to the concerns of ICPD. So there have been various attempts or exercises to create lists of population-related sustainable development goals that are relevant in the different regions. And now I think we need to try and compare those different efforts at the regional level and figure out what they mean at the global level and how we can make good use of those efforts. Most of these regional reviews have been preceded by a CSO forum. We're going to hear from Siva soon about that aspect. And I think all of them have an aspiration of influencing the global discussion at the 52nd session of the Commission on Population and Development next April. And so for that purpose, it's worth noting that the Bureau of the 52nd session of the Commission on Population and Development has recently decided, and this is still pending a non-objection period, assuming there are no objections from any of the regions, which I would not expect, the Bureau decided that they would like to include in the 52nd session of the CPD a high-level interactive panel on the regional reviews during the plenary of the annual session next April, in which the chairs of each of the regional review meetings would be invited to participate. And to our knowledge, this is the first time that this has been done, to bring together representatives of the regions in this kind of panel. And this will, the plan is for this to take place on the second day of the annual session on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. at the start of the second day. And so we hope that this will encourage somewhat higher level of participation in the meeting also. And we really look forward to this aspect of the 52nd session. I think that covers your questions. If there was anything specific you want me to revisit, I'd be happy to do that later.
Very good. Thank you, John, for that update. And I think it's also reflecting the many different population development issues we are facing in different regions. And I think having a conversation what's happening in the various regions is something which would be most welcome. And you know, that's also part of why we are doing all these reviews, to see what are the specificities you know, in the area of population and development. Now, let me turn to Siva. And one ingredient in the success of the ICPD was the consultations which took place between member states, between the UN system, between academia and the civil society. And this is also that, you know, this high-level panel is representing. What would be interesting to learn a little bit from your perspective is, how has the civil society been able to use the Ministerial Declaration from 2013, and what are the emerging population and development issues that you can see in this region? And, you know, how do you think we should adjust our way forward?
Yeah, thank you, Bjorn. I just want to say that for the last 2 days, we've come from very high-level energy meetings, which were the CSO and the youth forums, and you know, where there were really in-depth discussions on a range of interesting issues which are taking place in the region. And I believe the representatives of the CSO and the youth forum will be making interventions, and you know, it'd be really great to have member states take note of those interventions. You know, the ICPD POA, I was just looking at that beautiful video, and I was like thinking 179 governments committed to the program of action, which when we look at today's scenario of a kind of a fragmenting global scenario, it is difficult to think that 179 member states will actually be in agreement on such a comprehensive document as the ICPD today. And I also wanted to remind that the ICPD program of action was actually extended by the UN General Assembly by the resolution 65-234, so to be continued until the goals of the program of action are actually reached, you know. The APPC is considered as the regional ICPD, and as such has been really a focus of the work of civil society organizations as well as member states and UN agencies to see how we can actually push the goals of the ICPD further. And the 6th APPC, I think, marked a really high point of the APPC negotiations, because we had actually put a lot of member states were able to agree on many forward-looking issues, which we have a lot of great hopes on that will really take forward the agenda in the region. And it was a very exciting time, because we had, I think, all the member states were here, and a large number of CSOs were also here during that time. So we are really very happy to have this process of the midterm review taking place. But also to remind, as John was saying, there were similar things that happened in the other regions. And what has happened is both Latin America and Africa have committed to a regional monitoring framework. And I think this has been one of the gaps in Asia that we really need to push for it. The ICPD program of action and the 6th APPC, the issues covered in the 6th APPC Ministerial Declaration actually provide the great terrain of what are the sustainable development and the people's rights issues that are in the region. And as such, it's important to track all of that, because the SDG indicator, the SDG achievement is like, you know, the peak that you climb, like a mountain right top, right? But you need the whole range of issues to actually be covered and tracked and monitored. And of course, for us, the most two important demographic trends that I would like to talk about is actually about young people and women and girls, right? Asia is very often touted as the example of having realized the demographic dividend because of lowering the total fertility rates and encouraging, you know, education and access to health to a level that many of the countries of the region were able to make that next step forward to become the developing countries, right? However, I think that, you know, now we also have untapped human potential within our regions itself. And we have seen actually in African member states being able to seize that lingo of the demographic dividend to drive the discourse at their country level forward. But if we realize that in our region, we actually have 700 million young people. And the 700 young people are a very vast number. And education, investment in education, investment in health, investment in sexual and reproductive health services to help them determine when to get married, who to get married, how many children to have, if at all, are really essential to taking the next leap forward, right? So this is untapped human potential that we can realize. Although we think that, although a number of member states, as Gavin has said, has actually reduced their total fertility rate to below 4, right? But there is still this huge untapped human capital, but we can only realize it if we actually invest in young people. The second group that I'd like to talk about is actually women and girls, right? And we know that labor force participation in a number of countries still remains at a very low level. We have to ensure early age marriage occurs, and so we need to have like a legal age of marriage being implemented more strongly, access to education, but also to look at what are the gender power imbalances that holds women and girls back from fully participating in their country and their economies, right? And amongst that is actually a number of legal reforms that need to take place. I mean, equality within family, equality within society, and equality as a citizen above the courts of the country, one essential step. Because we not only see that girls are not only given lesser investment in education, or they're married off early because they're not considered as being part of their family, but actually belonging to the family that they marry into, right? They also have unequal inheritance rights within the family, or they're not able to access land and capital or financial markets in the way that men are able to do. So ensuring their rights are fully kind of covered by the laws in society is one important step. The second thing is, despite all of the progress that we have, we know that 66,000 women die in childbirth. I mean, the estimated 66,000 women die in childbirth in Southern Asia mainly, but from our region, right? 132 million women lack access to contraception and family planning. Of the maternal deaths, almost as high as 14% are due to unsafe abortions. I mean, so we know that, and these are gaps which are occurring amongst the poorest, the more marginalized groups, the rural, those who live hard to reach area. So if we really want to realize leaving no one behind, there needs to be a great deal of investment in these issues to ensure, you know, the prosperity of that community and that society. So really the next leap forward for the region, you know, to realize that dividend of that human potential lies in young people and women. So that's my pitch.
Thank you so much, Siva, and really to put this spotlight on young people and women and girls in this context, for contributing not just for the ICPD, but also for development at the community level and at the national level. So I think we have heard very interesting and very good, you know, take on what's happening in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of population and development issues. So I would like to open the floor for comments and suggestions or questions to the panelists. Do we have anyone who would like to break the ice? Anybody in the, yes, please, Afghanistan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I would like to congratulate, the chair of the midterm review of the 6th Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development and the whole Bureau, that's Fiji, Afghanistan, under the leadership of Philippines. And I thank the panel for giving us global, regional, and country perspective when it comes to population and development. I did not hear anything about, some of the countries in the region that are suffering from conflict. The conflict and emergency issues were not highlighted in the presentations that were given by the panel members. I hope, we have a chance, to reflect on those issues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from Afghanistan. And, if I may add to that, is also this region is one of the most disaster-prone regions in general. So in addition to conflict, also how countries can manage natural disasters and humanitarian situations. And perhaps, Mr. Minister, if later on you may want to reflect on that from your perspective, and also how you from the civil society can contribute to move from development to humanitarian situations and back into development. Any other questions, comments before I return to the panelists? Yes, Vietnam, distinguished delegate, please.
Honorable Chairs, I just have 2 points to raise your idea to focus on the 2 points. As the first, just no doubt about the investment for young people. This is our future. So the government, the member states should invest much more for young people, including education, employment, sexual and reproductive health. In terms of health, I think that we should expand the comprehensive sexual education and also the youth-friendly services. That's very important. As our colleague, representative from Thailand just mentioned, the trend of the abortion in adolescence. So we have to take into account that fact. The second point is when we focus on the young people, we also have to take care of the elderly, the aging population. From the view of I thought that it might be except some country, but most of country of our region, we are facing with the aging. So we have to deal with the situation to make the obstacle to be the opportunity for the sustainable development. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, distinguished delegate from Vietnam. And I think you are pointing to very important questions which are a reflection of what's changing in society. So perhaps, Mr. Jones, later on, you can address how do you see this, the youth bulge in the region at the same time as we have a population aging? How do we, address that as we move forward? Do I have any other delegate who would like to ask any questions or comments? Anybody from Observer, Civil Society? Yes, the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Bangladesh now competing against drug. I think international community should come forward to take this initiative because young generation is going to be destroyed by taking a different type of drug. So neighboring country should help so that drug cannot be entered from one country to another country, and they should help the country to refrain the youth generation from drug.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please go ahead and please introduce yourself.
I'm Professor Lakshman Disanayak from the University of Colombo. I will be a panelist for the last session tomorrow afternoon. And I think we need to connect the first demographic dividend with the second demographic dividend, which we will start with population aging. I think some of the panelists concentrated on the first demographic dividend by investing in youth now. So that is very important because we need to invest and also provide decent employment opportunities for the current labor force. Plus, we need to improve their saving capacities. By the time they reach the age 60, then they will have actually accumulated wealth to take care of at the elderly age. So the population aging becomes the second demographic dividend if we only start treating our current labor force well at this moment. So because they will be the future elderly. So there are we are at three different stages as Professor Jones mentioned in terms of demographic transition. So therefore, this link has to be explored, and we need to invest more and more in the current labor force. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important point. And maybe, John, you can address that as we come back to the panel, and also Mr. Jones. Any other comments? Right. Well, maybe then, Your Excellency, if we could hear your reflections about perhaps how you in Papua New Guinea are addressing issues, hard to reach areas, what happens when there is a natural disaster, or I know that recently you had a volcano eruption which, put a lot of strain on the government, and how you saw, the collaboration between different partners. That would be very interesting to learn a little bit more about from your perspective.
Thank you. I'll deal with that first. Firstly, our government fully recognizes that disasters are here to stay, including volcanic eruptions, earthquakes. We have now decided to embark on a program for volcanic eruptions to relocate the people away from the volcanic areas. That process has kicked in. We had a previous eruption, and we've really managed to relocate the people and put them on 4 hectares of land each family, given them cocoa seedlings, build them a home, and they've been able to resettle and integrate into our new community. And that's been very useful for us. And we have 2 other groups that have now been displaced. And we have provided funding in the budget for next year to acquire land and relocate them into safety areas away from the normal villages. So we have a program of relocation. So that's how we are dealing with that. And we have now for the first time provided a seed fund just to cater for disasters in our budget process, in recognition of the fact that these eruptions and other disasters are here to stay. We've also bought some new planes for our military to ensure they're able to respond quite quickly to disasters. So we are building up our own capacity and looking at new legislation to to respond in a far better way that we have been able to. We are very thankful to all our partners, many of whom are here, who helped us during disasters. So we now need to really build our own capacity to deal with our own disasters in the country. Coming back to the huge unemployment with the young people in our country, our situation is unique. The land is not owned by the crown or the state. The land is owned by the people. And therefore, our government strategy is not to try and minimize young people coming into the urban areas to look for employment and other opportunities. Our strategy is to keep them in the rural areas where their land is, where they have access to land, and build the roads, the airports, the shipping services, so we can help them unlock their economic potential by working on the land. And that's why we are focused on bringing large-scale agriculture investments by way of nuclear estates to provide market opportunities for our people who can remain on their land and be involved in commercial agriculture. That's really where our future is. There'll be a limit to how many jobs you can create in mines and in other industries. Our future is in agriculture, and that's a key focus of our government to unlock the agriculture potential of our country. We also need to educate our people to a level where they can go back and work as skilled workers on their own land. And that's really where our future is.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for highlighting these issues. Siva, about natural disasters and humanitarian context, from a civil society organization perspective, how do you see that, and what do you think, how can we strengthen the resilience among women and men to better cope with the changing environment?
Yeah, I think that also when we talk about the humanitarian conflict, I mean, we have to tie in with the question, which is basically there are a number of countries in the region which are either undergoing conflict or on the basis of post-conflict situation, and they have to also do a lot of peace-building process within the community and the society and set up of government, and so it's a huge undertaking. I think that this goes back to like why spaces like the Asia-Pacific Population Conference are particularly vital, right? Because we are able to have amongst the member states in our own region being able to cooperate across borders. So whether the issue is conflict or climate change, the spillovers across borders are very evident, you know, and it causes influx of refugees, people who are in a crisis situation. It not only starts in one country, but it can actually cross across the different countries and affect them. So it will affect the region as a whole. So I think a regional cooperative mindset with regards to this is really very critical. The second thing I want to say is when we talk about resilience, so, okay, Firstly, conflict and climate change is occurring in contexts where there are already a great number of social imbalances. So many of these areas and the groups that are affected already belong to the poor and marginalized sectors. They're living in like very disaster or very difficult areas in the first place, which has already made them removed from the development benefits of which the urban elites may enjoy. Right? And then within that context, the gender power imbalances and the age power imbalances, so most affected by conflict and disaster are invariably women and young people. And that's why within any sort of either humanitarian relief or even within resilience programs, we really need to take into consideration the special needs and the rights of women, and how do we actually build up community again, not to create that unequal situation that was there before, which caused the conflict or which made that effect of disaster so bad, but actually to really rebuild that resilience of society by empowering young people and empowering women with their rights. You know, so I think that's a really important strategy moving ahead, because we don't see climate change ceasing or withdrawing in its effects, but only, you know, the effects are going to be exacerbated. The second thing is I really have a lot of faith in governments in the region, and very recently, I mean, to answer the representative from Vietnam, is that we had a regional policy dialogue on comprehensive sexuality education where we had invited 15 countries. And it's very easy to look and say, oh, countries, oh, we're very like, you know, Asian countries are conservative. But every single country in that room had made commitments, had done curriculum reform, had tried to deliver some aspect of comprehensive sexuality education. So I really believe that, you know, spaces where, you know, Asian countries are able to talk, exchange lessons on many of these vital issues are really important for us to be able to discuss our issues in our own space, and we can really move forward together.
Thank you very much. Very important aspects, especially about cross-border issues, and that changes in the environment and climate doesn't, you know, stick to one country. It really affects more than one country and the whole region as such. Professor Jones, maybe if you could elaborate a little bit about the opportunities and challenges with a young population at the same time as you have an aging population, and what does that mean for countries in this region?
Yes, thank you. Just first of all on aging, you know, we tend to take a very negative attitude towards the fact that the proportion of elderly in the population is going to go up over time. But if we look at it another way, those who enter the ages which we consider to be elderly, 65 plus, are now going to live longer than they did in the past, having reached that age, and they are going to live longer in a healthy state. And so, you know, if you look at it from a different point of view, it doesn't look quite as daunting as if you just look at those percentages in that age group. By the same token, of course, there are major challenges in looking ahead to aging populations in the region, both in terms of health services, in terms of income maintenance and other things. So I don't want to underestimate the challenges ahead. At the same time, yes, we have this youth bulge. And I would like you to look back for a minute to the year 2000. You know, when we entered the 21st century, that was 18 years ago now. There was great optimism at that time about the 21st century being the Asian century. And I think it's true. I think it is the Asian century, and Asia is doing very well in many ways. But if you look at some aspects of education, it's very sad to see that there are still children 18 years into the century who are not going to school at all, and many others who drop out of primary school before they become literate. Now, if you're an illiterate young person in the year 2018, you're going to be an illiterate member of the labour force in the year 2060, more than halfway through this century. So the timing of this thing is very crucial. If we don't educate our young people now, we live with the effects of that way into the future. And you might say, well, you can deal with that through adult education, but I think the history of adult education programs is that on the whole, they don't deal with the issues very well. We have to get the young people into school at the ages at which they need to go to school.
Thank you very much, Professor, for those comments. John, working at the global level and listening to the discussion here, how do you see the Asia-Pacific? What are the specific features in terms of population and development, gender equality and inequities that you think it's worthwhile highlighting from a perspective of a global work?
Well, Bjorn, if I may, I think I'm going to turn to the question from the delegate from Afghanistan, because I think he raised an important point about the displacement issues, and I think more could be said about that. We talked about the increasing mobility of the human population, and this is the displacement aspect is kind of the unfortunate side of that affects some countries quite significantly, and Afghanistan in particular being one of them. Currently the country with the largest number of refugees, that's been the source of the largest number, is Syria, and Afghanistan is number 2. Syria has about more than 5 million people. I don't know the exact numbers. Afghanistan more like in the range of 2.5 million refugees, and another country in the region that is also a major source of refugees is Myanmar, of course, and so this is well known. This is the kind of the unfortunate side of global mobility, but refugees on the whole are a relatively small part of the total flow of persons between countries, roughly about 10% of the total. But for some countries, of course, this is quite significant. And it interacts with many of the other issues that we're talking about here in this meeting today. For example, the particular challenges posed by displacement to pregnant women and the need for service and the difficulty of providing services in that context. And you see this in maternal mortality outcomes. Maternal mortality being, of course, this leading indicator of health care and the quality of health care that in times of distress, pregnant women are among the most vulnerable because of the reliance, the dependence on the healthcare system. But another major issue, of course, is education and the risk of losing a generation of children who are caught up in these situations. And of course, these are political issues, and I don't know that they can be addressed so comprehensively in the context of a conference on population and development, but they do shape the landscape and are very much an important part of this discussion. So at the global level, of course, this has led to a discussion that's really the most robust discussion of migration and refugee issues that's ever occurred at the United Nations over the last few years. The New York Declaration was adopted. New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants was adopted in 2016. And there was an agreement, of course, that then there would be these 2 global compacts developed, one on refugees and the other for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Both of those are in the process. They've been agreed, and it's time. The one for safe, orderly, and regular migration will be adopted at the conference in Marrakesh that's going to take place next month. So both of these, I think, are important advances in terms of how governments view these issues and how they try to come together around some framework for addressing them in a way that respects human rights and the needs of the people involved, and also the sovereignty of the countries. So these are really complex issues that are closely interrelated with the concerns of ICPD. And it's worth noting that sometimes we forget that the Chapter 10 of the Program of Action from the International Conference on Population and Development was really a quite complete statement on the issues around international migration, and that's very much a part of this tradition as well as the other issues that sometimes take more prominence in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that, and that is very true. And I think the discussions we have had now this morning shows really how important ICPD is for sustainable development and an important part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that the ICPD, which was adopted 25 years ago, is still very, very valid for the work that we are doing at the various levels, be that the global, regional, or governments efforts to reach sustainable development and find economic growth together with social investments and also handling changes in the environment. I know that we are coming to an end, but before that I'm just looking at the panelists if there is any burning point that you wish to highlight before we come to a close. No, it doesn't seem like that. I think what we have done this morning is also to touch on the upcoming panels tomorrow and the various themes around sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, gender equality, young people, the environment, resilience, and changing in demographic structures, in particular as to population aging. So I think we will have great opportunities to go deeper into these aspects as we move forward. But now I would like to thank the panelists, and please join me in giving them a applause. And it's over to you now, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So we are resuming on agenda item 2. We thank the panel and the moderator. I have been informed that many countries would like to take the floor in the afternoon. I will now request, though, that countries begin giving their statements this morning so that we can accommodate the number of statements within the day. In this regard, I would like to remind delegates to approach the conference officer to inscribe in the speakers list. The Secretariat has provided us with guidance for our interventions under each agenda item, which I invite you to follow. Please be aware that since this is an intergovernmental meeting, standard procedure allows for interventions by government delegations of member and associate member states, followed by observer governments, then intergovernmental organizations, UN bodies and specialized agencies, and then representatives of civil society. I kindly ask delegations to adhere to the time limit of 5 minutes for those speaking in their national capacity under Agenda Item 2. For those speaking under the other agenda items, the time limit is 3 minutes. Delegations with longer statements are encouraged to read out the salient points and provide the full statement for posting on the meeting website. Representatives of intergovernmental organizations, UN bodies, and specialized agencies, and then representatives of civil society are given 3 minutes to make formal statements under each agenda item. Please be aware that in the interest of time and with respect to other delegations, I must be very firm in ensuring that speakers not exceed their allotted time. I will give a signal at 4 minutes and ask the speakers to begin to wrap up so that we can conclude all statements within the allotted time of 5 minutes. I will now open the floor for interventions from delegates. I invite the first speaker, the distinguished delegate from Lao PDR, to take the floor. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned that I have to use 5 minutes, I try my best, and if I cannot, cover all of my speech, I will dispatch my, speech to the meeting. Good morning, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, on behalf of the Laos delegation, I would like to express our appreciation for the organizing this Asian and Pacific Population Conference today here in Bangkok. This is important and timely forum to share lessons learned and discussion various important issues, taking into the rights of the population across the globe, particularly in Asia and the Pacific. Laopedia has adopted the 20 years forward-looking program of action at the ICPD held in Cairo in 1994. Since then, Laopedia has made progress in many areas, which I would like to highlight among others. For instance, our country has made tremendous progress in reducing poverty. For 1992 to 2015, the Lao national poverty rate has declined from 46% to 23%, achieving MDG target ahead of time. And currently, this year, national poverty rate is at 18%. Household welfare and has improved in terms of the ownership of access, condition of housing, and access to the public service such as health and education care. The recent adoption of the strategic private sector development plan and SME development strategy, the government have to shape the direction of private sector, which directly has an impact on the poverty eradication and creating job opportunity. There has been an overall reduction of the early childhood mortality rate. ICIS 2017 show that under 5 mortality rate stand at 46 days per 1,000 live birth as compared to 79 in 2012. Over the past 2 decades, maternal mortality ratio has declined from 1,100 per 100,000 live birth in 1990 to around 206 in 2015. Major hospitals provide cesarean services and basic emerging obstetric and newborn care services are available in every district. After the 20 years program of action of International Conference of Population and Development, the government of Laopedia has reaffirmed its commitment toward the ICPD through further adoption of the 10 program. 2014-2023 of ASEAN and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development in 2013 in Bangkok during the 6th ASEAN and Pacific Population Conference. Since APMD 2014, Laopedia has made an exponential progress in ICPD, especially for the last 2 years, 2016-2018. As seen in the new policy and guideline being adopted, the prominent progress of ICPD through the adoption and localization of IPPD, including, for instance, tremendous reduction in poverty, as I mentioned at the beginning, the increasing number of effective transition rate from the primary school to secondary school, the improvement in the reproductive health and right, the guideline to support the adolescent and young people, the increased number of female holding key positions in the public and private sector, and many more.
Please wrap up.
Yes. The SDG that Laos also has adopted in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, detailed achievement and progress well documented in midterm review of our 8th 5-year National Society Economic Development that we recently submit to the National Assembly, and we expect to share with our development partner for the upcoming roundtable meeting on the 4th and 5th next month. Before I end my remark, I would like to reiterate that if we are to attain the objective of sustainable development as highlighted in the priority action of APMD, then it will be necessary for all of us to think carefully how we could work together under common framework to ensure that we use our resources in effective and also efficient manner. In Laopedia, we have Vientiane Declaration on Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation identified 8 principles to guide how we work together to yield concrete results and impact. I strongly believe that business as usual needs to be changed, and we need to be more about results with clearer indicators and targets. I will end my remark here and would like to wish a fruitful discussion on the future of ICPD. Once again, allow me to thank all of participants, all of the development partner and agency to support and contribution to the Laos for implementation of our national society economic development to achieve as well as the local global agenda 2030. I sincerely thank to UNFPA, ESCAP, and other agencies and government for always being trust development partner in this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate from Lao PDR. I now invite the next speaker, the distinguished delegate from Bhutan, to take the floor.
Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Royal Government of Bhutan, my delegation and I would like to thank UNFPA and ESCAP for organizing the midterm review of the Asia and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population Development and supporting our participation. At the outset, let me share a broad outline of population figures of Bhutan, trends and policies. Based on the Population and Housing Census of Bhutan 2017, the total resident population reached 727,145, of which 52.3% are males and 47.8% are females. The population grew at the rate of 1.3 between 2005 and 2017, and the population density also increased from 16 persons per square kilometer in 2005 to 19 persons per square kilometer in 2017. While the total population has increased in absolute terms, growth rate has declined. Total fertility rate has declined from 2.5 in 2005 to 1.7 in 2017. However, Bhutan's population is expected to grow since 50% of the population is below 26.9 years of age. Mr. Chairman, allow me now to briefly report on the progress made on the key priority areas of the Program of Action of the IPCD and the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration. Poverty alleviation. Bhutan accords high priority towards the eradication of poverty in all forms, through continuous investment in education, health, and other social sectors. These are supplemented by various targeted poverty reduction initiatives like the National Rehabilitation Program, Rural Economy Advancement Program, Targeted Household Poverty Program, and Land Use Rights System. Significant achievements have been made in reducing both income and multidimensional poverty. People living below national income poverty reduced from 12% in 2012 to 8.2% in 2017. Similarly, the multidimensional poverty rate reduced from 12.7% in 2012 to 5.8% in 2017. Poverty still remains a rural phenomenon, with 97% of the income poor and 93% of the MPI poor residing in rural areas. In the health sector, Bhutan has made great achievement in healthcare since the advent of modern healthcare in early 60s and continues to accord high priority to the provision of equitable and quality universal access to free healthcare services. With major investment in the facilities and services, the health indicators improved significantly over the last 5 years. Bhutan today has sustained primary healthcare coverage at 95.5%. Childhood immunization stands at 95.1%. Access to safe drinking water increased from 84.2% in 2005 to 98% in 2017. Similarly, access to improved sanitation increased from 54.8% in 2010 to 66.3% in 2016. With the improvement in health services, diseases such as polio, measles, and goiter have been eliminated, and deaths from tuberculosis and malaria have been greatly reduced. Bhutan Health Trust Fund, created in 1998 to help ensure availability of vaccines and essential drugs, has contributed to sustain primary health care, eliminate financing uncertainties,
Please wrap up,
and achieve self-reliance in primary health care services. on the sexual and reproductive health services are guaranteed through legislation and policy. The National Health Policy ensures comprehensive quality maternal and child health care service provisions. In 2017, 97.2% of the births were attended by health professionals compared to 50.9% in 2005. Institutional delivery rate have increased to 93.4% in 2017. Contraceptive prevalence rate stands at 65.6% in 2010, and percentage of women aged 15 to 49 years who knew at least one contraceptive method stands at 96.3%. The maternal mortality ratio, infant mortality rate, and under 5 mortality rate have been reduced significantly. Bhutan had made remarkable progress in education by strengthening school infrastructure and improving quality and access to education. Education continues to receive one of the highest budget allocation with about 10% of the total budget in all the 5-year plans. Further, the state is mandated by the Constitution to provide free education to all school-going children up to the 10th standard. Higher education is also provided free and made equally accessible on the basis of merit. With improved access to quality education, the adjusted net primary enrollment ratio increased to 98.8%. The ratio of female to male in tertiary education increased from 17% in 2013 to 83% in 2017. In order to improve retention of girls in schools through improved hygiene, a project for providing low-cost sanitary pads was launched in 2017, and provision of separate toilet facilities to girls in schools has been initiated.
Please conclude, Mr. Delegate.
Bhutan has taken several initiatives to create an enabling environment for promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment, including legislative reforms, mainstreaming of gender issues into policies, plans, and programs, and promoting civil society organizations working for women and children. The internal framework to address sexual harassment and gender issues at the workplace is being implemented in the government. Further, to encourage women's participation in parliamentary and local government elections, various initiatives like capacity building, voter education programs, and civic investments were organized. Presently, the parliament has 15% women representation, which is an increase from 8% in 2013. While commendable progress has been made in the areas of gender equality and women's empowerment, some challenges still remain. Efforts need to be made to enhance enrollment rates for girls at tertiary level and reduce female unemployment. There's also need to enhance women's representation in parliament, politics, and to adopt temporary social measures to address the existing disparities. Domestic violence is prevalent in adolescent sexual activity. Early union and marriage are major concerns. Issues and challenges. Bhutan's demographic profile is youthful with 45.8% of the total population below the age of 24 years. The prevalence of sexual activity is high among adolescents aged 10 to 19 years. Rising youth unemployment is a concern. On the other hand, the number of elderly people aged 65 and over is increasing. The aging index for Bhutan has increased from 14.2 in 2005 to 22.7 in 2017, and is most likely to increase with the improvement of life expectancy and continuous decline in fertility.
Please conclude, sir.
Mr. Chairman, going forward, Bhutan will continue to address population development needs through its mainstream development programs. This will be complemented by targeted programs to address the last-mile challenges related to poverty, eradication, and addressing the needs of the vulnerable groups. In conclusion, we took note of the initiative to have an indicator framework for monitoring progress towards the implementation of the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development. Lastly, the Royal Government of Bhutan would like to reform its commitment to the principles of ICPD, which finds resonance with Bhutan's development philosophy of gross national happiness. We look forward to a successful conclusion of the conference and a productive outcome. Thank you, and Tasdile.
Thank you, Mr. Delegate from Bhutan. I'd like to remind all delegations that your full statements will be published on site and will be adopted into the chair's report. I would now like to invite the next speaker, the distinguished delegate from Mongolia, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to highlight that the government of Mongolia has spared no efforts in implementing the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development, and supporting the national population development overall. In 2015, the world leaders gathered in New York at the UN Summit to unanimously adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. a long-term global development framework based upon the social, economic, and environmental pillars. Following the adoption of the Agenda 2030, the Parliament of Mongolia adopted Mongolia's Sustainable Development Vision 2030 in 2016. Under this vision, from the 17 SDGs, we are implementing the 7 most relevant and 9 relevant to our national circumstances goals. The goals and targets specified in the Agenda 2030 and the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development have been duly reflected in and carried out through our National Vision 2030, government's plans of action, and 3-pillar development policy issued in 2018. More specifically, in the result of adopting a broad range of policies and programs, including the economic and sustainable development policy, environmental and green development policy, state policies on population development and health, laws of Mongolia on the child rights, on the rights of persons with disabilities, youth development and the elderly, the national program on gender equality and others, the legal and policy environment for population development and economic conditions has been substantially improved, and more than 500 tangible activities implemented. Mr. Chair, in Mongolia, in spite of the fact that the population growth rate decreased from 2.2% in 2013 to 1.9% in 2017, the total number of population has increased by 8.5% from 2013 to 2017. The fertility rate tends to grow from 2.7 children per woman in 2013 to 2.8 in 2017. On the contrary, poverty rate in Mongolia, which totaled at 21.6% in 2014, mounted to 29.6% in 2016. In other words, poverty level raised by 8 points and nearly a million people were affected by poverty. The main factors for poverty reduction are employment support, economic upsurge, and diversification. Accordingly, the labor code has been amended and submitted to the parliament. This draft law aims at improving labor regulations for women, persons with disabilities, and child labor, and introducing international best practices. Moreover, development of the national poverty reduction strategy is underway. In order to meet Mongolia's Sustainable Development Vision 2030 target on ascertaining inclusive and sustainable economic growth and supporting employment, the government of Mongolia aspires to cut the unemployment level to 6% by 2020, to 4% by 2025, and to 3% in 2030. Mr. Chair, my country has made significant progresses in refining the legal environment for citizens' health protection. The state obligations to deliver accessible, equitable, and quality health services to mothers and infants have been guaranteed by the health law and related provisions. For instance, maternal mortality rate per 100,000 live births has declined from 42.6 to 26.9%. Likewise, there is a remarkable advancement in the information and statistics field. Upon successful completion of the midterm population and house census in 2015, Mongolia has duly become one of the countries that met the international criteria for birth and death registration. The National Statistical Office has played a crucial role in building data and statistics necessary for effective outcome documents of the ICPD, Asia-Pacific Population Conference, and the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration, and it conducted the first ever national study on gender-based violence in 2017. Mr. Chair, there is no doubt that we will further succeed in the implementation of our population development policies in line with the Agenda 2030, ICPT Program of Action, and the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration, as my government is attaching great importance to human development and reproductive health by rendering all necessary policy and budgetary support. Taking this opportunity, we also wish to highlight that our efforts in the field of population development have always been strongly supported by the UN system organizations, including UNFPA and other international organizations, donors, and partners. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Delegate from Mongolia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I will now adjourn the meeting. May I encourage the distinguished delegates to join the many side events scheduled over the lunch break. I kindly request that you return to this meeting room by 1400 or 2 o'clock. I now invite the Secretary to make some housekeeping announcements.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join one of the several side events that will take place from now, 12 noon, until 2 p.m. The side events are as follows: Comprehensive Sexuality Education, a Foundation for Life and Love, organized by the government of Cambodia. Leveraging on ICPD Program of Action, Beijing Program of Action, and the SDGs to promote young people's SRHR, organized by Arrow, Youth Lead, and YPeer. Raising the bar on gender equality and women's empowerment in the age of climate change, organized by Arrow. And Family, Community, and State in Aging Societies, organized by the Islamic Republic of Iran and UNFPA. Further details on these side events may be found on the meeting websites or on the monitors outside this room, in particular location and times. You're kindly requested to return to the meeting room at 2 p.m. sharp. Food is available from the cafeteria. The cafeteria is one level below this conference room. Food is also available at the coffee shop on the ground floor. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Secretary. The meeting is adjourned. How many?